All right, folks, let us get started. Welcome to the Privacy Exchange Community Show and Tell today with our super special guest, Jeff Jackish. In today's session with Jeff, we're going to be talking about ways to understand your online digital footprint. That's from data brokers to social media data to public records and more. Jeff is a managing partner at Obscure IQ, which is a company that provides advanced personal data removal services and privacy risk mitigation strategies for both companies and governments. Jeff is one of the top experts in data privacy research, privacy enhancing technologies, the data broker business model practices. He is the foremost researcher on that topic in the world, I would say, very truly. So his understanding of this space is just unmatched, and I'm super excited to have him on the show to talk about today's digital challenges in terms of managing your privacy risk, combating disinformation, and promoting safe online interactions. So as usual, we will spend the next 25 minutes or so today together. First, I'll do a few questions with Jeff solo, and then we'll open it up to audience Q&A, which will be unrecorded. So we will turn off the recording that's presently on for the Q&A portion. And just as a general reminder, today's information is for general information purposes only. Jeff is not a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. None of us are lawyers. It's not legal advice. So if you need legal advice, go talk to your own attorney to get any help that you need. So, okay. Are you ready to hop in, Jeff?
I am. Thank you, Mary. How are you?
I'm doing super. So my first question to you, Jeff, is how do you define a digital footprint and why is it important for both individuals and companies to understand theirs?
Well, I think of your digital footprint sort of like that trail of breadcrumbs, that digital dust that you leave behind every place you go. Um, it's really sort of like everybody in the world is a detective. And you're the suspect, right? And you sort of have to think about it that way because everything you do can sort of be held against you. It's sort of like the internet has a memory, and it can very rarely be wiped away. It's pretty hard to delete information from the internet, right? And so, every little bit of information, everything that you do, and it doesn't sort of seem that way unless you think really hard about it, but everything you do sort of has a consequence, has an action. It's tracked. Um, and we don't really think about that when we do things, right? When we navigate, when we talk, when we do virtually anything online, it has a consequence. It gets tracked in some particular way. Even when we're on social media apps, when we're scrolling down, right? Obviously that scroll action is sort of tracked, right? But we don't realize that if we stop for 3 seconds and look at something, right? Even if we don't click on it or like it, the fact that we stopped there, that's tracked, right? Um, and there's all these sort of like minute little things that we don't realize necessarily are being tracked. Yeah, that's actually getting tracked. Um, it's pretty amazing. Every website out there on average has 32 different trackers on it, right? And every business virtually now is collecting our user information and trying to monetize it. It's pretty amazing. You now are working for privacy for cars, right? Because automakers now are not just trying to sell you a car, they're also trying to collect your data and monetize the data. But it's not just, social media companies, right? Or big tech companies. Every company wants to get your data as well as sell you whatever they're trying to sell you. Um, think about the Zoom thing that we're in right now. Okay. They've got a service. They're charging it. They have a freemium model, right? But there's a charge for it. But the data that they're collecting on us right now, that's pretty valuable too. I'm sure they're trying to monetize that in some way. But think about just the voice modulation, right? If they're collecting my voice here, they could potentially use that to generate my voice and copy me, right? But what about if they collected the history of my voice over time, right? Could they tell when I'm stressed out? Could they tell if my mental health is deteriorating? What about my physical health? There's actually research out now that shows that you can tell people what their physical health is based upon their voice over time, right? That's valuable information. Is Zoom collecting that? Are they able to use that and monetize that? There is information about us out there that we don't even think about that's getting collected and put into profiles by data brokers and other organizations. That's your digital footprint that nobody understands.
So this is fascinating. And I'm curious. So we talked about like just on the surface level what your digital footprint is. I want to know about why companies are collecting this. Obviously, they're using it for something, selling it, sharing it. So what's the role of data brokers, social media, and even public records in shaping that online identity? And why are they doing that? There's obviously an incentive there, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's just a profit motive. I don't know that it's anything more invasive than or I don't think that they have a anything more than a profit motive in mind in most cases. I don't think that they're necessarily trying to screw people over intentionally, but they're looking to make money, and there's nothing in their way in most cases, right? The data privacy laws really aren't stopping them. If the privacy laws exist at all, they're rarely enforced enough to make people stop doing it, right? Um, and so, I mean, we're starting to put up some blocks in place, but I mean, you can see how the big companies like, Facebook, let's take as an example, right? I mean, it really hasn't changed their business model much at all with all the stuff that's come out, even GDPR. They're doing a little bit of stuff now with this pay or I forget what
You're okay.
yeah, pay or okay in Europe, right? But is it really changing what they're doing a whole lot?
Yeah.
Not really in my mind, right? I mean, their business model is pretty much still the same. Um, so, I mean, I like that we're moving forward with privacy, but it doesn't seem to me that it's affecting surveillance capitalism a whole lot.
Yeah, and that's a really great term that you've just introduced, surveillance capitalism. I also see it as part of the attention economy. The more targeted you can get to someone's interest, or even that scrolling that you were talking about, that's a data point, the more you can capture their attention, which can then be sold. So what's very interesting is I think a lot of times we talk about this surveillance and how it impacts individuals, whether like maybe you're not shown certain things or you're disqualified from different services or whatever. But there's also an organizational risk that I think we haven't really talked a lot about with that individual surveillance, capitalistic, those practices and how that affects companies, governments, and other bodies
Yeah.
in at large. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah. So you hit on it, right? There's obviously a risk to us personally, right? That we're going to get breached, that we're going to lose our identity, that somebody's going to defraud us based upon all this information that's out there that they can gather about us. Because if it's available to a data broker, a lot of these data brokers are easily breachable themselves, or you can just walk up to them and buy that information. Sometimes you can't easily buy it for an individual, but you can buy it for a cohort, and then you can pull that individual out of the cohort, right?
Mm.
But as far as organizations, what some organizations are just finally waking up to is the fact that their organizations are breached from within, right? They're not generally hacked any longer, right? They're essentially logged into, and they're logged into by their employees' credentials. And the way those credentials are compromised is through attacks by those against those employees, right? And so it's the it's the personal information, the digital footprints of all of their employees that are the threat surface of that organization, right?
Yeah.
So they they're starting to think about this in terms of like executive digital protection packages. So let's protect the CEO or maybe the CTO or maybe, the top people in the organization, which is great, right? Because those people need protection. And lots of those attacks in the past, at least, have gone against those individuals because they are the big fish, right? And we used to even have, terms about that sort of going after those sort of whales in the phishing campaigns. But now, right, you see even with things like the hotel attacks in um, Las Vegas, right? Those attacks were actually going after the desk personnel, right? So they didn't go after the big people. They went after smaller fish, right, with those phishing attacks and compromised those entire security organizations to take them down. Those were like huge data breaches. So you can go after the organization in a myriad of different ways. You don't have to do it from the top any longer. And so you have to think about the digital footprints of virtually all of your employees if you really want to protect your organization. It's no longer enough to essentially put a perimeter defense around your organization because the employees are the targets and they're already inside.
Yeah. So that's super interesting where really in that case too, the one in Las Vegas, the attackers that they waited months to do that, from my understanding. So they had a targeted social engineering campaign based on the digital footprints of folks that they were able to get. And I guess you could say, like, if you think targeted advertising works, which it does, the same goes for targeted spear phishing type of cyber attacks. So it's preying on the social engineering techniques to infiltrate a business like that. So I'm curious, one last question before we open it up to the audience. In your experience, what are effective strategies for individuals and companies to mitigate that risk? So we know that that risk is there, but what do you do about it?
So I don't think that there's a heck of a lot of effective things, right? You can get rid of some of the social footprint, the digital footprint, because if there's less data points out there, you're less at risk, right? Now, some of that data can't be gotten rid of immediately, right? Because a lot of that data has already been breached and is sitting out there on the dark web already, right? I mean, the stuff that we do for clients is to go get rid of some of their digital footprint. But if it's already on the dark web, I can't go pull that back, right?
Yeah.
It's already there. But you can stop leaking, right? And it goes away slowly over time because that stuff gets, out of date. The other thing you can do is you can do some training, right? You can educate people to be less susceptible to that stuff. But when you have an AI powered attack, right, that grabs a bunch of your personal information, I'm not
Good
sure
luck.
how effective education is going to be, right? I mean, the AI, and good hackers, right, that have months to plan are going to get around any education attempt that you try.
Yeah. Absolutely. Maybe there's just a en masse stopping people pleasing education. Like if it wasn't something you asked for or it's on your to-do list, just don't even bother answering. Um, this has been fascinating, Jeff. Let's open it up to Q&A.